Have you ever wondered why some people, no matter how hard they work, never seem to escape financial struggle, while others, with the same 24 hours in a day, steadily build wealth, freedom, and security? The difference isn't always intelligence, opportunity, or even luck. More often than not, it comes down to how they think about money. This is the heartbeat of Robert Kiyosaki's book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. First published in 1997, it has become one of the most influential guides to personal finance, teaching millions to challenge the traditional lessons about money passed down by family, teachers, and society. It's not a technical manual full of numbers and equations. Instead, it's part memoir, part philosophy, and part financial awakening told through the voices of two father figures who shaped the author's life in dramatically different ways. Kiyosaki introduces us to his two dads. One is his biological father, the poor dad, a man with a respectable career, solid education, and deeply traditional beliefs about working hard, earning a salary, and playing it safe. The other is his best friend's father, the rich dad who never finished the 8th grade, but understood how money really works, and who passed on insights that challenged nearly every conventional belief about success. From this clash of philosophies emerges the central tension of the book. Do you spend your life working for money, or do you learn how to make money work for you? Robert begins his story in Hawaii, where he grew up in a middle-class family. At the age of 9, he realized something most kids don't even think about. Some families seem to struggle constantly with money, while others always seem to be comfortable. Curious and ambitious, he and his best friend Mike wanted to figure out how wealth was created. So, like many children might, they went straight to the source. They asked Mike's father, the man who would become Robert's rich dad, to teach them how to become rich. Rich Dad agreed, but not in the way they expected. He didn't sit them down with textbooks or long lectures. Instead, he gave them experiences. At first, he hired the boys to work in one of his small stores, paying them 10 cents an hour. The work was boring, the pay insultingly low. After a few weeks, Robert grew frustrated and felt cheated. He decided to confront Rich Dad, threatening to quit if he wasn't paid fairly. And that's when the first lesson began. Rich Dad explained that life itself doesn't always pay you what you think you deserve. Most people, when faced with dissatisfaction, run back to the comfort of a paycheck, even if it's small, because the fear of being without money is greater than the desire to learn. If Robert wanted to truly become rich, he had to stop thinking like an employee and start thinking like an investor. He had to stop working for money and learn how to make money work for him. This shift in mindset from wages to wealth, from fear to opportunity, planted the seed for everything that followed. One of the most important ideas Kiyosaki stresses is the difference between assets and liabilities. It sounds simple at first, but it flips conventional wisdom upside down. Poor Dad, his biological father, believed in the traditional path. Study hard, get a good job, climb the ladder, buy a house, and save diligently. For him, a home was considered the ultimate asset, a symbol of success and security. But Rich Dad disagreed. He defined assets as things that put money into your pocket, and liabilities as things that take money out. By that logic, a house isn't an asset if it constantly drains you with mortgage payments, taxes, and maintenance. This was a revolutionary idea for Robert. What most people proudly called assets were often liabilities in disguise. A new car, a bigger house, expensive gadgets all looked like wealth, but actually trapped people in an endless cycle of debt. Real wealth, Rich Dad taught, comes from owning income-generating assets. Businesses, investments, real estate, intellectual property. Things that keep paying you whether you're working or not. It wasn't about working harder. It was about working smarter and owning things that created value even while you slept. But knowing this truth and living it are two different things. That's where fear and desire come in. Rich Dad explained that two emotions control most people's financial lives. Fear of not having money pushes them to seek security in jobs. Desire for more money pushes them to spend whatever they earn. This cycle keeps people trapped in what Kiyosaki calls the rat race, working tirelessly just to keep up with bills, loans, and fleeting pleasures. The only way out is to take control of those emotions. Instead of reacting with fear, the wealthy learn to see opportunities. Instead of being blinded by desire for luxuries, they build assets that later buy those luxuries effortlessly. This isn't about deprivation. It's about timing and discipline. Buy assets first, let them grow, and then let those assets pay for your lifestyle. Robert contrasts his poor dad and rich dad often, and the differences are striking. Poor Dad believed in education for the sake of a good job. Rich Dad believed in education for the sake of freedom. Poor Dad taught him to write a strong resume. Rich Dad taught him to build a strong balance sheet. Poor Dad thought the government and employers would protect you. Rich Dad believed you had to protect yourself by learning skills schools never taught: how to manage money, how to understand taxes, how to see through investments, and how to take risks wisely. Perhaps the most painful difference between the two fathers was their attitude toward failure. Poor Dad saw mistakes as something to be avoided. Rich Dad saw them as the only real teacher. Every setback was an opportunity to learn what not to do, and every risk taken, even when it didn't work out, was a step closer to financial wisdom. For young Robert, this was a revelation. If he wanted to be financially free, he couldn't follow the safe, traditional path. He had to learn, experiment, and sometimes fail. By his teenage years, Kiyosaki had internalized one of Rich Dad's most powerful lessons: the importance of financial literacy. Schools taught him how to read and write, how to solve equations, how to memorize history. But no one explained how taxes worked, why people ended up in debt, or how to evaluate an investment. Without financial literacy, even the smartest people ended up working for those who understood money better. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, all highly educated professionals often lived paycheck to paycheck because they never learned how to manage wealth. Rich Dad insisted that learning to read financial statements was more valuable than mastering algebra. Understanding the difference between an income column and an expense column could change your entire life. With this skill, you could see truth others missed. You could see whether something was an asset or liability. You could see whether you were moving toward freedom or deeper into the rat race. Another key theme is the importance of mindset when it comes to opportunity. Rich Dad often told Robert, "Opportunities are everywhere, but only the prepared mind can see them." Most people miss chances because they are too afraid to act, or because they're trained to think like employees instead of investors. For example, when a market crash comes, most panic and sell what little they own. But the wealthy see it as a clearance sale, a time to acquire assets cheaply. When new industries emerge, most people hesitate, waiting for proof. But the wealthy experiment early, learn quickly, and adapt. This way of thinking, proactive, curious, unafraid of failure, became one of the greatest differences between the two dads, and one of the greatest advantages Robert carried into adulthood. As the book progresses, Kiyosaki introduces the concept of working to learn, not just to earn. He recalls how Rich Dad encouraged him to take jobs not for the paycheck, but for the skills they offered. Sales, marketing, communication, investing. Each new skill was like a tool in the toolbox of financial independence. Poor Dad believed in specializing, becoming an expert in one field, and climbing the ladder. Rich Dad believed in broadening knowledge, gaining experiences that could later be combined in powerful ways. The more diverse your skills, the more opportunities you can see and seize. This teaching connected directly to another lesson: the power of entrepreneurship. Owning your own business, even if it starts small, gives you control over your income and future. Working for someone else means you are always vulnerable to layoffs, office politics, or corporate decisions you cannot control. By this point in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the contrast between the two father figures is clear. One father was educated, respected, and hardworking, but financially insecure his entire life. The other was less formally educated but financially wise, creating wealth not just for himself but for future generations. The lessons Robert absorbed as a young man began shaping his choices. He started to see the world differently. Where others saw obstacles, he looked for opportunities. Where others worked for money, he started thinking about how to let money work for him. But these were only the beginnings of the journey. The real challenge would come later, when theory met practice, when Robert had to take risks, face setbacks, and prove whether Rich Dad's lessons could hold up in the real world. And that's where the story deepens. The journey into financial wisdom didn't end with mindset shifts alone. Rich Dad believed that philosophy was only useful if paired with strategy. To move from theory to practice, Robert needed to understand the practical mechanics of wealth. One of the first lessons was about taxes and corporations. Poor Dad saw taxes as a civic duty, something inevitable, part of the price of being a responsible citizen. Rich Dad, however, showed Robert how the wealthy legally use corporations as shields and tools. By funneling income through companies, the rich could pay expenses first and get taxed last, while employees earned wages, paid taxes immediately, and then lived on whatever remained. This wasn't about cheating the system, it was about understanding it. The rules of money are not taught in schools, but they shape the world we live in. Those who master them play the game at an advantage. Those who ignore them spend their lives working harder while keeping less. Another vital concept was the power of self-investment. Rich Dad emphasized that financial intelligence is built through ongoing education, not a one-time degree. Books, seminars, mentors, and real-world experiments all became Robert's curriculum. The idea was simple. Before you can grow wealth outside yourself, you must grow wealth inside your mind. This ties into one of the book's central themes. It's not about how much money you make, but about how much money you keep, how hard it works for you, and how many generations it can serve. Wealth isn't just numbers in a bank account. It's knowledge, discipline, and the ability to create opportunities. Robert also learned that taking action is what separates the dreamers from the doers. Many people talk about starting businesses, investing in real estate, or writing books. Few actually take the leap. Fear stops them. Doubt whispers in their ears. The result is years of waiting, planning, but never moving. Rich Dad's perspective was blunt. The perfect opportunity doesn't exist. You create opportunity by starting small, by making mistakes, and by learning as you go. Every wealthy person Robert ever studied had failed at something, often many times. What set them apart wasn't perfection, it was persistence. In his later reflections, Kiyosaki introduces the idea of building wealth through 4 fundamental skills: accounting, investing, markets, and the law. Accounting is the language of money, the ability to read numbers and understand what they reveal. Investing is the science of money, learning how to put resources to work and measure risk. Markets are about supply and demand, the ever-changing pulse of human behavior that drives prices. And law, knowing how corporations, taxes, and regulations can either work against you or work for you. These 4 pillars became Robert's foundation. Mastering them doesn't happen overnight, but ignoring them guarantees lifelong struggle. There's also an emotional layer to the book, often overlooked. Robert's poor dad was not a villain. He was a good man, hardworking, principled, and loving. His advice wasn't malicious, it was simply limited by what he himself had been taught. That's perhaps the most haunting lesson of all, how easy it is to pass down financial insecurity from one generation to the next, all while believing you're guiding your children towards success. This is why Rich Dad's lessons mattered so much. They weren't just about money. They were about breaking a cycle. They were about choosing freedom over fear, self-education over blind tradition, and courage over conformity. By the end of the book, several key insights stand out like milestones on Robert's journey. First, the rich don't work for money, they make money work for them. That means focusing on building assets, not just collecting paychecks. Second, financial literacy is essential. Without it, even high incomes vanish. With it, modest beginnings can blossom into real wealth. Third, risks cannot be avoided, but they can be managed. Avoiding all risk leads to stagnation. Taking calculated risks leads to growth. Fourth, the most valuable investment you'll ever make is in yourself, in your education, in your ability to adapt, and in your courage to act. And finally, wealth is not defined by possessions. It is defined by freedom. True wealth is measured in how long you could sustain your life if you stopped working today. For some, that's a week. For others, it's a lifetime. Toward the closing chapters, Kiyosaki distills these lessons into a practical philosophy. He explains that financial independence doesn't happen overnight. It's built slowly by making small choices that align with wealth-building principles. Saving to invest rather than saving to spend. Learning a new skill instead of chasing a quick raise. Looking at every expense and asking, is this an asset or a liability? He shares stories of investing in real estate, of seeing opportunities others overlooked, and of how, step by step, his financial independence grew. None of it was magic. None of it required being born rich. It required mindset, education, and above all, action. The final reflection of Rich Dad, Poor Dad is philosophical, almost spiritual in its simplicity. The poor and middle class work for money, believing stability comes from jobs, salaries, and promotions. The rich let money work for them, believing stability comes from assets, knowledge, and independence. Both paths require effort. Both paths carry struggle, but one leads to freedom and the other leads to a cage, no matter how comfortable that cage may feel. The choice, Robert insists, belongs to each of us. Every paycheck, every purchase, every decision either moves us closer to freedom or deeper into the rat race. As the story of Rich Dad and Poor Dad concludes, the message lingers long after the last page. Financial freedom begins not with dollars, but with ideas. Change your thoughts and your relationship with money changes. Change your relationship with money, and your future opens in ways once unimaginable. The book closes not with a guarantee, but with an invitation to question, to learn, to act, and to take control of the one resource we all share, the power of choice. Thank you for listening to this journey through Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. If the insights resonated with you, consider subscribing so you won't miss more such book explorations. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. What lesson stood out to you the most? Was it the idea of assets and liabilities, or the challenge of overcoming fear and desire? Share your reflections in the comments. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing these ideas, perhaps someone caught in the cycle of working harder but never getting ahead, share this with them. It might just spark a shift in their perspective too. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep building the kind of freedom that lasts.